You're listening to the Tel Aviv Review here on TLV1. I am Gilad Halpern. Welcome back. I am now joined here in the studio by Professor Meir Amor. He's an Israeli sociologist teaching at Concordia University in Canada, who has a decades-long engagement, both as an academic and an activist, in the Mizrahi cause, that is, the struggle of Jews of Oriental descent for equality and representation in the predominantly Ashkenazi Israel. Hello, Meir, and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you again.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with the basics. A key concept in your writing is Ashkenazi privilege. Mm-hmm. What does it mean exactly?
Well, I wrote a book and basically tried to explain that concept. But if I need to do something very concisely and precisely, I would say that Ashkenazi privilege is a procedure. It's a social procedure, a social and political procedure by which things are defined as inevitable, natural development or entitlement kind of thing that are accorded or distributed to a specific kind of persona. Now, of course, it's not an individual thing. It is a kind of a complex composite of who is fitting who the person or who that persona is filling that her or its or his life and actions and thoughts and taste and inclinations are the normative figure.
So it's less of a class issue and more of a cultural issue.
No, it is a combined issue. Mm-hmm. It is a class and a cultural issue, of course. But there is nowhere in history you can find class issues separate from cultural issues, of course. But in Israel, if you want to speak about the class issue, for example, I'll give you an example. It will go almost naturally, the explanation. For example, let's take a very common thing in Israel and I'm working on that right now, which we call Yishuvim Kihilatiyim, or gated communities, or thing of closed communities kind of notion.
Selective communities.
Selective community. Actually, the most interesting aspect of those gated community are the selection process into which people are joined in, or how they are selected into. But if you take the concept in a general notion, it is not something that started in the late 70s in the occupied territories, which it is where it started. It is much more...
You mean the state of mind goes way back?
The state of mind of such selective communities. You can see that in Israeli society, selective communities were the main road or the main path through which settlements of Palestine by Jews was activated. If you take kibbutzim, moshavim, moshavot, all these things, basically all of them were selective to a lesser or a larger degree. Now, those settlements from the early stages of Zionism were public institutions or public communities who received public funds, Jewish, before the state of Israel, Jewish public funds that were distributed by settlement agencies like the Jewish Fund and so forth, and then later on the Israeli government, which you get public resources that are distributed to private hands. Now, if the selection of the group it is a selection, so just a few people receive those funds. Now, of course, those people had a pioneering ideology behind.
Exactly. I was just going to say the selection was based on ideological grounds, right?
To some extent. To some extent, of course. In the early stages, it was the most important thing. And then we had kibbutzim as the harbingers or the pioneers, as they were called, of the people who cultivated the frontier, that transformed the frontier into a civilized Israeli society, and they were accorded.
Not just the physical one, the imagined one as well. I mean, that's,
of course, both. But there was a physical aspect to that imagined.
Absolutely.
well, people were in the frontiers and they did work the land and so forth, and they received a lot of resources, but those resources stayed there. So now, if you speak about kibbutzim, 3 or 4 generations later, so the pioneering aspect is not there, but the material aspect is still there to a large extent.
Would you say that the kibbutzim are still the darling of the establishment? I mean, they've pretty much all of them gone bankrupt.
Well, it's not true. Not all of them, many of them. But you see, if you wanted the Marxist aspect, right? So Marxist would ask you, okay, give me your analysis of capital and your analysis of land. Well, so if you do the analysis of land in Israel, you would see that the land in Israel is controlled, first of all, by Jews. And whatever is controlled by Jews, most of that control is activated or in the hand of a specific group of people, which is not a very large minority. It's if you take kibbutzim, moshavim, and yeshuvim kilatim together, you put them together, they control about 90% of the land mass of the Israeli state.
Yeah. Excluding the West Bank.
Excluding the West Bank to some extent. Now, within the Israeli, though, we won't go into the political aspect of all that, but clearly it's a very important material base. Now, if you want to move to the cultural aspect, of course, this selection is based on some kind of people who can be admitted into those communities, whether it was 60 or 70 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago in 1980s, in Yeshuvim Kilatim, in the Judaification of the Galilee, or if you want, gated communities in the occupied territory that were populated by Amana of Gush Emunim. There were always, and that's of course an ideological selection. So
going back to the Ashkenazi-Mizrahi divide here, I mean, right now we can attribute it to many factors, but would you say that the selection process benefits and gives precedence to Ashkenazim? Is it a clear-cut thing? There's absolutely no doubt about it?
Well, in sociology or in social science, there is nothing.
There's always a doubt.
Right? There is always a doubt, and there are always fuzzy boundaries and lines and so forth. And so, but Ashkenazi and Mizrahi for me are not ethnic or not a place of origin of your parents. It has almost nothing to do with that in terms of its causal relations.
So a person whose parents were born in Morocco could be an Ashkenazi for you, and a person born whose parents were born in Germany can be a Mizrahi.
Absolutely. For example, I would tell you that in Israel today, in 2015, there are many people who were born as Ashkenazi, to parents who were Ashkenazi, who came from, let's say, the founding fathers of the state and so forth and so on. Like the people we saw in 2011 demonstrating in Tel Aviv, who were basically saying, if you would listen to them, they were saying, our parents were doing much better than we do. And we are working, the father and the mother to 2 kids, we are working, and we cannot, our resources do not meet our ends. Now, what does that mean? Like, if you see, because those were the kids who were demonstrating in
the social protest of 2011.
2011. And they were right, because their parents were granted many resources that they would never, because the state cannot support an Ashkenazi fully populated community that will be based on origin in Europe. Of course not. So people were born Ashkenazi and they are becoming Mizrahi. And
does that mean, does Mizrahi equal dispossessed?
To a large extent, yes. In Israel, yes. Now, if you want, you can say, oh, well, what do you do with the nationalistic aspect with Palestinians? Well, they are dispossessed, but they have a surplus dispossession that is not so much only for the Jewish. Now, the secret mechanism or formula is, of course, how to dispossess the Palestinian, how to make sure that Palestinians in Israel receive as little as possible. This is the main goal. This is the main mechanism working. Underneath that umbrella, there is other processes of dispossession. And within that, there is clearly an hegemonic group of people who hail from Europe, but this is almost irrelevant because they became Israeli. They became the dominant Israeli group. So Ashkenazi and Mizrahi are sabras. They were born in Israel. They were not brought from Europe or from Syria or Morocco.
So that gives me actually a lot of hope, this fluidity of the boundaries between Ashkenazi and Sephardi and Mizrahi, because it means that, the division is not carved in stone. It's surmountable. It can, things can change.
Of course,
for the better.
This is Ashkenazi and Mizrahi for me is anti-essentialist perception. Of course, you see, one of the things that Israeli politics, with regard to Mizrahi and Ashkenazi, is so much trying to avoid is coming to terms with the two very, let's say, fundamental but very simple facts. For one of them is that Israel has no borders as a state. The second one is Israel has no definition of citizenship. In Israel, it's the only state in the world that does not recognize Israeli as their citizens. And that's not my opinion. That's the Supreme Court decision that you cannot be an Israeli in Israel. And that's so.
Yeah, but that has to do, to give it a bit of context, it has to do with the separation between citizenship and nationality in this country. That,
right.
You can be an Israeli citizen with an Israeli passport, but then there's a rubric in your passport that says nationality, and normally it's Jewish and Arab. But not as well as dozens of others.
Well,
not Israeli.
I have a dual passport, right? I am a Canadian and also Israeli. I am a Canadian in my passport. In Israeli, I'm Jew. In my Israeli passport, I'm a Jew.
Yeah.
So you see the problem of definition of Israeli citizenship. So let's go back to the issue of Mizrahi Ashkenazi and to your anti-essentialist insight, which is correct. My argument is that if you want to civilize, that is, make Israeli citizenship workable, you need to, if you want, orientalize, in my definition, the hegemonic bodies of Israel. You need to bring, for example, we in Hebrew, it goes better. We need to lemazreach et ha'ezrachut. For example, let me give you an example. If you live in Dimona or you live in Yerucham or you live in Kiryat Shmona, there is no reason why your educational facilities and educational what the state is supposed to give you, provide you, should be less than anybody else in Tel Aviv. You see, there are some ridiculous notions in Israel that people speak them so much. For example, the periphery in Israel. I'm coming from a country that it takes 5 or 6 hours to travel by plane from one side to the other, and nobody speaks about the periphery in Canada. In Israel, you speak about you are living in Haifa and you are a periphery of Tel Aviv. You live in Tel Aviv, and Afula is a periphery. It's ridiculously, and people really treat that as a reality. What is peripheral in living in Afula, where all the kibbutzim around you are considered center? So it's completely not geographical, not essentialist. It's everything political, and of course, it is rooted in realities of economic and
exactly. It's a question of the distribution of resources.
Absolutely, and in Israel, the distribution of resources is the most guarded, sacred cow, and basically in that, if you do the analysis according to that, Ashkenazi hegemonic group, which is completely Israeli, benefits absolutely more than any other group. There is no question about it. Wherever you go, any issue that you would go, even if you take the Ethiopian problem that is in the streets today, right? What is their complaint? They are saying, you see, there are huge amounts of resources that are actually earmarked to be allocated to us, but they never get there. Who take them? Well, the social workers, the people who are managing all those things. Who are they in most cases? Those are the people who would say to you later on after the demonstration, they have different cultures. We have to travel from, we are only 67 years old country, and they have to travel centuries and all this kind of nonsense. And if what Ethiopians need in Israel as citizens, they don't need your hugs, they don't need your emotion, they need resources.
Yeah, it brings to mind another question. You spoke briefly about the Palestinians here in Israel, that they are, ultra dispossessed. But where do the Russians fit into this mold? Are they Ashkenazi? Are they Mizrahi? Because they're not really the cultural elite that we identify with Ashkenazi culture on the one hand, but on the other, they're not so-called backward communities as the Mizrahis and dispossessed are often labeled. How would you place them in this?
Well, as I said, Mizrahi and Ashkenazi are not exhaustive. It's not that it will explain everything. And of course, Jews who came from Russia in the last 30 years, or non-Jews who came from Russia in the last 30 years, are not there with what Avishai Margalit once called the big white hope. They are not there anymore. We know that they are not our big white hope, but they were a big white hope for Ashkenazi groups in Israel. In the 1990s, that's how Professor Avishai Margalit called them. And it was published in the New York Review of Books, his major article about that. So, well, the advantage of those people was or is that they came relatively in a short period of time, and they were quite aware of how important political organization is. And they did organize, and they did right away stepped into the political mechanism. The thing that is helping them and was always against Israel, Jews who came from Morocco, that their political organization was always legitimate, whereas any Mizrahi organization was always described and labeled as illegitimate and not a normative thing.
Including Shas, for example? Shas is the darling of the establishment in its own way.
You see, Shas is a kind of a very interesting Israeli plant or Israeli flower. It's ridiculous to say that it is a flower, but it is. But you see, because Shas was created by an Ashkenazi mind within the Jewish conception of Israel, that you could not discriminate, or you could not exclude them. You could not exclude Shas as a Jewish community, as a Jewish political. So they used the regular currency in Israeli politics, and they stepped in. But you see, Shas was used for up until today as a major mechanism to destroy the welfare state.
So would you say, drawing on that, would you say that Shas in their practices are Ashkenazi?
Yes, they were. Absolutely. In the first 30 years of their existence, they were absolutely Ashkenazi political party.
Because they did the best to perpetuate the current system, to continue the dispossession of their constituency. I'm
not so sure about their constituency, but you see...
Of the purported constituency.
You see, what the major role that Shas had played was to destroy the welfare state, because the welfare state needs to give universally to citizens. And what Shas has done is said, give us the money, we will give it to our community, and we don't care about the other community. And that's what actually happened.
Which is anti-Mizrahi, according to...
Of course. Of course it was anti-Mizrahi. Of course. But anybody questioned the fact that in the last 30 years... Until now, and I don't know what will happen now, but until now, Mizrahi dispossession kept on with the same.
Okay, I need to ask you for a tip. How can I, an Ashkenazi white man who had a very comfortable upbringing in one of the wealthiest places in this country, can do something to Mizrahize myself?
Well, it's very simple. I think that if you are fighting for Israeli citizenship, and you are saying that, for example, something that sounds very liberal, but I don't think it is liberal. I think it goes much more beyond liberal or libertarian perception of the law. If you would speak about the rule of law in Israel, what does that mean? That the people with power in Israel will be controlled by law exactly as the poorest and the weak point in that chain. In Israel today, people with power are, they bypass the law. In Hebrew, it goes well. Chazakim in Hebrew,
the powerful.
Okfim et hachok.
Oh, you mean they play? It's either enforce and bypass.
Well, they bypass the law. Yeah. The law is not enforceable to them, because they can, pick up the phone, speak to the people, and they would do whatever they need.
Yeah.
But people who are weak at the last.
Yeah. Who needs connections when you have protectia, as
Exactly.
they say?
So, it was invented in Israel, almost, right? So, but anyway, so.
I'm sorry, it's the other way around. Who needs protectia when you have connections?
When you have whatever, it works both ways. But anyway, the point is that I am seeing myself not as a Mizrahi, I'm seeing myself as an Israeli citizen. And I am speaking about Israeli citizenship. And I want Israeli citizenship. I want Israeli citizenship because law and the state should be the protection of the weakest, not a shield for the powerful. And in Israel, the state plays as the shield of the powerful.
Which is a legal thing beyond the more equitable distribution of resources. You're saying, to perhaps hone in on the concept of citizenship to ensure at least the underlying principles for good citizenship in this country.
Well, I take citizenship and citizens seriously. And if you speak about that seriously, you would see that citizenship means, for example, you can, you have civil rights, you have political rights, and you should also have some social rights. Now, everybody knows today, we have enough knowledge about theory of citizenship that if you don't have civic, political and social rights, your citizenship is somehow hampered and not really working. And in Israel, the whole issue of social rights are so weak, and there is a need. And now, why? Basically, we know the reason why. You don't have a citizenship definition because you don't want to include Arabs. So you want to remain within the Jewish structure. If you are staying within the Jewish structure, you are actually allowing those processes to go on.
All right, Professor Meir Amor, I'm afraid this is all we have time for, but thank you very much for coming in and talking to us about this. This is really interesting, and I hope that we'll find another opportunity to continue this discussion.
Thank you very much.